Good afternoon. I am Rafael Ochoa, General Manager of Hillside Memorial Park and Mortuary. For over 35 years, Hillside Memorial Park has partnered with American Jewish University to enhance the Jewish community through educational programming that promotes the importance of constructive dialogue. Now, more than ever, it is imperative that we use our voice to stand up for what we believe in, to protect others, and to share our deepest support and thoughts with family and friends. This important time spent together seamlessly weaves together past, present, and future generations, ensuring our narratives resonate and inspire countless generations ahead. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our Temple Israel of Hollywood Senior Rabbi, Mari Cherno, to share a few words.
Thank you so much, Raf, and thank you to Hillside and to AJU for putting together this important series. We know in the Jewish tradition that words are important and words are powerful. We can elevate people with words, we can support people with words, we can harm people with words, we can even kill people with words. These end-of-life conversations are difficult to have, and we put them off and we resist them. But this series reminds us how important they are and how using our words with our closest, dearest loved ones will help us strengthen our family bonds, understand our own desires, and communicate them to those we love. Thank you for being here.
Welcome. I'm so happy to see all of you, and I want to give a special thank you to Rafael Ochoa and to Rabbi Mari Cherno. Hi, Michael. I can't wait to introduce you. For those of you that are new to Open Learning, we're so glad that you're here. For those of you that are returning, thank you for coming back and getting a front row seat to best in class learning from American Jewish University. I'm particularly honored today to be a guest host for this Hillside series, and I'm so grateful because I cannot think of a more important topic, and I am so delighted to introduce our guest today, Michael Hebb. Let me say a word before I let you talk, Michael. How does an architect who is trained to design buildings end up creating a global well-being organization? You are a force of nature, a disruptor, and a visionary. As the founder of Death Over Dinner, you've now empowered over 100,000 people in 30 countries to talk about the most taboo topic, death, and do it again and again and again. Your empire, your vision is only growing, and it's the reason that the Obama Foundation, TED Med, Bill and Melinda Gates turn to you for consulting, for advice, for leadership. And today, your solution to shift culture one conversation at a time is here to help us do just that. Welcome, Michael. I'm so glad you're here.
Well, it's an honor to be here. Thank you, Sherry.
So we're going to dive right in. You said you had one goal in life was to change the world one conversation at a time. Is this a calling? When did this mission begin?
Well, I'll tell you, and it relates to death. My father died on Halloween when I was 13 years old, and he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's when I was in second grade. So my early childhood was really in a kind of chaotic, slow motion train wreck, centered around my father's illness and then his death. And people are saying, wow, he must have been young to get Alzheimer's with such a young child. But my father was 72 years old when I was born. So.
Okay, that is young. Let's just clarify.
Yeah. And the day he died, I woke up in the middle of the night at the exact time he died, even though it was across of the town of Bend. And I didn't know why until the morning. And then I found out that his time of death was why I woke up in the middle of the night. I went out to celebrate Halloween that night. I went to school and I didn't feel like I could tell any of my friends that my father had just died. And, that speaks to the fact that, of course, kids don't, but our culture and society doesn't create space for these conversations. And I didn't feel like anybody could hold that weight of this news. And so I went through my day trying to be as much of a normal 13-year-old as possible. And we went out that night, and there's a moment that I'll never forget as we were out, probably underage drinking, if I'm being honest. Kids don't do that anymore, thank God, right? But
Yeah.
causing trouble, right? We were being idiots. We were like TPing houses. And what happened for me was the movie of my life skipped a beat. And I started to see myself and my friends from a perspective that was new to me. I started to watch us in this movie. This death that I was experiencing, this grief, was a rupture in my otherwise normal existence. And I started to ask big questions, like, why are we being jerks? Why are we interacting with each other like this? Why are we not more connected? Why can't I talk to my friends about the fact that my father died? Where do I take my emotions? What is this all about? So it started existential questions. And those existential questions quickly grew into a pretty serious spiritual path that then entwined with architecture and education in the classics. I studied the classics at Reed College, and the idea of the dinner table as being a central part of society, and that questions, when they're properly asked in a Socratic manner, or many other folks have asked great questions, became this central theme to my life. So really started at 13.
Thank you for sharing that. And I'm sorry about the death of your father at such a young age, because I don't think we're ever equipped to manage those emotions. And I love that you've created forums to do that. You said you started asking big questions. Now, as us Jews, and I'll preface this, that seems normal because we sit around a Seder table and all we do is ask questions. But let's set the record straight. With a name like Michael Hebb, which literally Hebrew, who is an honorary, is a member of Reboot, who met his wife through Reboot, who's done 20,000 Seders, you are not Jewish. So tell us a little bit about your sort of religious background.
Yeah, so I really wanted to be Jewish.
Even in the midst of all this, you still want to be Jewish? We'll take
Oh,
you.
absolutely, absolutely. I wish Hebb was really a Jewish name, and we've tried to find it through, ancestry and through other genealogies, and we can't, and also through 23andMe. But I was raised atheist. But my parents were very much against organized religion, vocal about it, and had a very clear perspective of when you're dead, you're dead. Like there's nothing else. There's no mystery. That never resonated with me. I've had a felt sense that there's something much bigger going on in the universe, that perhaps we have a destiny, perhaps we have a reason that we're here, perhaps there's something after we die, whatever form that might be. So I had a sense about that and continued to have pretty large experiences in my life that showed me that there is a lot of mystery and there's a lot of awe. And I found early answers in Eastern religion from the time, 13, 14, 15, 16. Spent a lot of time with reading Thomas Merton, and a lot of the mystics from both Western and Eastern traditions. Started, practicing transcendental meditation and had out-of-body experiences. I was like, okay, that is not contained in my atheist upbringing per se. So, my story is really like about things being constantly cracked open. I think it's like this. And it gets cracked open.
You're an honorary Jew, but we'll have you whenever you're ready. And I understand your girlfriend is Jewish, so we do have a mikvah, so we can make that happen very quickly. But I want to get into what we're really talking about today, which is embracing these difficult conversations. 75% of Americans say they want to die at home, but only 25% do, often causing bankruptcy, ruptures in families, and all kinds of pain when people are the most vulnerable, when they're bearing a person that they love. You say end-of-life care is far from ideal. Why?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of reasons. The majority of our energy spent around end-of-life care is triggered by a crisis, right? Somebody gets a terrible diagnosis. Somebody is in the ICU. Somebody dies. Somebody has early onset or full-blown Alzheimer's. These are the things that wake us up to the fact that we have to start making decisions and that we should have had a plan. And maybe we don't even make some of those decisions or create the plan or think about what we would like to most have happen at that time. So that's one of the central issues that we face, is that not until there's a crisis. So we haven't figured out the carrot, quite frankly. We just get hit over and over again with the stick, right?
I'm going to push you on that. People act in crises, but why don't they act knowing that death is inevitable?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. One, we have a cognitive bias. If we can't experience it, we're less likely to want to talk about it, right? That's just the way that our brain, this is Daniel Kahneman, who just died, the groundbreaking scholar, Nobel Prize winner. So there's several cognitive biases that make it very difficult for us to consider our own death. One of those biases is we think we're an exception. Like the bad stuff happened to all of those folks it's not going to happen to us. Jews are actually maybe better with this in some sense, for better or for worse, understanding that bad things can happen. They have historically, and they might again. But we really do have this sense that it's not going to happen to us. And the other thing is, we don't like to upset people, is another bias. We don't want to bring up a topic that we think is going to cause discomfort. Whether it's going to cause discomfort or not, we have a bias towards not bringing up uncomfortable topics, right? So we have all of these biases that are making it so just personally we don't talk about the things. And then the other thing is, we have medicalized and institutionalized death. Death is not a medical act. It's a human thing. It's a community phenomenon. It's a community process. And it has been throughout time, but not in the last 50 years. In much the same way that we institutionalized our food system, right? But
this is an American thing, you say. Like other cultures are very different about death.
Well, I would say some other cultures are very different about grief. I wouldn't necessarily say that they're very different about death and dying, right? So people hold up, Jewish communities and Jewish folks as being great around end-of-life rituals, quite frankly.
Yeah, we're experts. That's what we think of. We're experts in Shiva and mourning, but we're not experts in pre-planning, as he'll tell you. We're not experts in that.
No one is. And people say, but in Mexico, they have a much deeper relationship to death. And it's like, yes, Dia de los Muertos, Day of the Dead, and is an example. In India, also great examples of how we honor the dead. In Japan, great examples. In Indonesia, etc. So that is true. But grief is very different than us leading up to death. And this is the area that we are universally pretty bad. And actually, we're better at it in the United States. We created palliative care. We took the idea of hospice from the UK and made it much more of a phenomenon. We have death doulas. We have all of this, all of these things that are in motion, but they're also quite young. And one thing that's very different is we didn't get the diagnoses about what was going to kill us in the past. The majority of us will find out what the thing is that's going to kill us. We'll learn about that. We'll learn that we have cancer. We'll learn that we have, MS. We'll learn that we have Alzheimer's. We'll learn that we have high blood pressure or type 2 diabetes. These things that will likely have some significant relationship to us dying and that are telling us information that our life has a limit. That is entirely new in the history of human experience. So it's completely understandable that we don't have a rich set of conversations or way of planning about death right now, because one, we've over-medicalized it and taken it out of the community so we don't see it. We don't see people getting sick. getting in their last days, having to deal with them, having to wash the body unless we have strong cultural rituals. And then we aren't able to existentially, psychologically deal with the fact that we now know or get news often about what might kill us. So we're at the very beginning of a new renaissance around this, and I want to give people a break.
For 25 years, you created Death Over Dinner, which we'll talk about in a little bit about how it's grown. But it's really hard to have this conversation. So you created a real strategy, and I want to go over the tools today because we have our biggest dinner coming up next week, which is Passover, the most celebrated Jewish holiday. And of course, my audience is going to say, we're not going to talk about death then, but there is no good time. So tell us about, when is the dinner? How do you do? Where do you start? Do you say, oh, by the way, grandma died 5 years ago, let's discuss?
Yeah, so a couple things. So Death Over Dinner has only been around 10 years.
Oh, sorry, but your work has been going for 25 years.
Yeah, for 25 years. And the other exciting thing is we've definitely far exceeded 1 million participants. So 100,000 is years ago. So there's
forgive me, because I was looking at some old data then.
No, it's great.
Never believe the internet.
And I say that not to say how cool is it that we've done 1 million people. It's the fact that there's been a sea change in people's willingness to have this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Right? 10 years ago, when I first created Death Over Dinner, and I go to a cocktail party, and people would say, "What do you do?" I'm like, "Oh, here it goes." And I'm primarily work in death or end of life, and this is what people would do. They'd like literally lean back from me, right? Like maybe I caught a bug or it might be contagious.
Right, like you're allergic or you have a virus.
Yeah, but then they lean in, right? So this was the response. It was like a weeble wobble. Like they lean out and then they lean in and they want to talk, right? Everybody wants to talk. But if you take nothing else from this conversation, take that everybody actually wants to talk. They do. You may not have unlocked the way into the conversation yet, but people know that they're going to die, want to talk about it. People are grieving. They want to talk about it. It's just about unlocking. So in the beginning, leaning away, coming in. Now when I say what I do, it's just leaning in, right? And then it's like, hey, Gene, hey, Gary, Frank, come over here. Do you know what this guy does? Right? So that's in 10 years. So there's been a significant change between where we were with the conversation and where we are now. We've still got tons of work to go. So yes, Death Over Dinner started 10 years ago. And the idea was quite simply, can I go from doing one meaningful dinner after another where I'm at every dinner to creating a model that was decentralized? And since we're in Passover season, the inspiration for Death Over Dinner was the Jewish Seder. And the inspiration for the Jewish Seder was the Athenian Symposium. After the temple was destroyed, the second time was like, how are we going to celebrate Passover? And this ingenious ritual was born, which is Seder. And so I was like, wow, can we create a new ritual around the table where people create their own experience? And can it be meaningful? Can it be more meaningful as it scales? And when we launched, there were 500 dinners in 20 countries the first night. And it has grown significantly from there. And for people who are like, what is Death Over Dinner? What is it? You go to the website, which I think is probably in the chat, and you identify why it is you want to have this dinner, right? Is it because you're grieving? Is it because there's been a terminal diagnosis in your family? Is it because you are interested for spiritual reasons? Could be a variety of things.
Or you want pre-planned for what is inevitable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so when you select that intention, it creates a script for you and also prompts you to do a little homework.
Give us an example of an intention.
So we call the why you want to do it your intention. So one of the only things you have to select on the website, do you want to have this dinner because you or someone you love is grieving? Do you want to have this dinner because you or someone you love has a terminal diagnosis, et cetera? So that's the intention, or just that you want to pre-plan You think it's a great idea. But really, the most important reason, so you get a script for your dinner, and it's all of the guesswork is gone. And then people host these dinners. We don't come around and cook them for you. I haven't been at all of these dinners. People often ask me to come and facilitate, and I say, you know what? It's better if I'm not there. These are intentionally non-facilitated spaces. And if you guys get in there together and muck about, you're going to find it more illuminating than if you have a person who's a quote unquote expert at the table.
And
so
you
that's
give pointers. You give a lot of pointers, like don't surprise people with the topic. So does that mean like before Seder, you should let people know, I need you to bring the matzah brie and I need you to bring the roast beef, and we will be talking about death. By the way, this year more than ever, death is in our midst. So it seems like one could argue this is the most appropriate time, but one could also argue that this is the worst time. So you don't surprise people. What does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, so what I'll often say is you don't invite people to pizza night and then surprise, you're having a death dinner. That is not the way to get people to be their most vulnerable. And you're certainly going to get a strong reaction. So if you want to be courageous and brave and create courageous, brave space around your Passover Seder, whether that is talking about end of life or whether that's talking about the Middle East, whether it's whatever that, if you want to use that space for something that is beyond the regular, Haggadah that you use for Passover, let people know. So one, they can opt in or they can opt out. So this is key with Death Over Dinner. Invite people. If somebody says no to coming to Death Over Dinner or a conversation about death at Passover, it doesn't mean that they don't want to talk about it. It might mean that they're not ready right at this moment. It might mean that at a dinner table with people they know or may not know is not how they want to have the experience. But if you're going to do that, you definitely want to prep people. And we should probably we've never created a specific Death Over Dinner Haggadah. And I don't know.
I think it would be amazing. I mean, just amazing. But some other pointers you have is don't surprise people, put your phone away, don't hog the talking stick, create the ambiance, give ample time. But one of the ones that I love is listen deeply and take notes. Why is it important to take notes?
Well, so if you're gathering your loved ones or your friends, it's also true with strangers, but it's much more important if we think about these gatherings or these conversations with people that care about you deeply, that might be around you or will be around you during your last chapter. And you're certainly, if you're sitting with folks who you will, quite frankly, be the caretaker of or be in the care circle of, these experiences and their responses to their questions are them telling you how they want to be loved. They're telling you how.
We're getting a flood of questions, and this one question just came in that literally, I think, says it all. What about children at the Seder? Because underneath that question is, we can't talk about things that are taboo at the Seder. And please don't, for the anonymous attendee that wrote in, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but what about children at the Seder? Is there context? How do you navigate? Because the assumption is we don't talk about those things.
Yeah, well, I'm not asking people to break with their family traditions around Seder. So
right, this is not about Passover. This is about 26 minutes that we sit down at a table and have a conversation.
Yeah, and this, you'll find that this specific night, if you set it aside and invite people, is going to go longer than 26 minutes. And I'm going to get to the person's question, but when we're at why we listen and why we take notes is we are getting operating instructions from our loved ones about how they want to be taken care of, what their fears are, and how they want to be honored. And everybody has a real deep personal vested interest in listening to how our loved ones want to be honored after they've died. And I'll tell you what that is. So if you don't know what your father, mother, spouse, grandparent, best friend, etc., wants, at their funeral, memorial, what happens to their ashes, if that's what's happening, where they want to be buried, if there's particular songs, if there's rituals, if there's something that they want to do in the world. If you don't have that information, your grief is going to be harder, deeper, and longer, and more confusing.
Wow.
So
wait, you need to say that again. If you don't have the necessary information, which we do through a series of methodologies from ethical wills and all kinds of other things, but if you don't have those conversations, you will make your life harder.
You will. Your grief will be more confusing, more chaotic. You'll feel more helplessness, hopelessness. And when you have operating instructions, this is how this person wanted me to honor them, and you do that, it's called grief work, and you're doing that work, it reduces the potency and duration of the grief. So we want to know these things, and people want to be heard around these things. Also, this relates to how you want to be taken care of in your final days. But as far as kids go, because kids are brought up and I want to talk about it. Do you include kids in the conversation about death? It's actually
not the Seder versus not the Seder, but you include kids in the conversation.
Yeah, that's a question that comes up often. And there's kind of two kinds of kids in the world. There's those kids that ask all those questions about death and really lean into it and are curious about it. Some of you are listening have those kids, or maybe were those kids, or know them. That's a particular type of kid. It has a curiosity. What happens when we die? What does it mean to die? Where is grandma? Like all of these things. You do need, I feel, not need, but a good idea is to meet that curiosity with your own curiosity or your own wondering about it. So if you say to one of those type of kids or any kid, hey, we're going to have this conversation about death, it might be pretty intense. It might be pretty emotional. Is that something you'd like to be part of? Right? A lot of kids will say, no, thank you. And you honor that, right? At some point, they are going to get curious. There's a great Confucius quote. Confucius once wrote, in each life, there are two lives. And the second one begins when we realize we only have one, right? And here we have the class of the two different types of people, not class, but the two different types of people in the world, the people that have had that realization and are living like they realize they only have one life because they realize how impermanent it is, and those that don't seem to have realized that yet, right? Most people on this call or in this webinar are of the part that realize that, right? So we have to have empathy and sympathy and kindness to folks that haven't crossed that threshold yet.
On the website, I love that. It's so beautiful. I was just kind of like, I forgot, oh my God, I'm anchoring because it was so beautiful what you just said. I was like, yeah, you really do understand when you only have one life. So thank you for that. You have a bunch of starter questions on the website. One of my favorites is, what is a good death for you? So talk about those starter questions and what's your favorite starter questions? Because everybody wants to know, okay, this is great in theory. I love this idea. I can create an ethical will according to Steve Leder, and I can pre-plan with Hillside, but how do I just actually make that call and take that one step?
Yeah, and ethical wills, advanced care directives, last will and testament, all of these things are absolutely important, arguably essential, right? But the thing that I think is most important in the whole sphere, when it comes to end of life, when it comes to your last chapter, and even quite frankly, this bleeds on into after you've died, but is selecting your healthcare proxy, right? So there's a couple things, like people want to talk, remember that, and do you have a healthcare proxy? And let's talk about that for the moment, because healthcare proxy is somebody who has you've empowered to make decisions for yourself when you can't, towards the end of your life or in a calamitous event. Now, this is terrible branding. Why do we call it a healthcare proxy? It sounds
Terrible word. Terrible.
It just like makes palliative care, terrible word. Like doctors are not in marketing. They should not be branding these things. They do a lot of great things. But to healthcare proxies, like your death best friend, right? Who do you trust with making decisions for you when you can't speak for yourself, right? Make sure you have that person. They are also way more effective than any piece of paper you sign, right? The doctors have to listen to this person. And so very essential. And we need to rebrand it. Like, if you do have a healthcare proxy, have you had open conversations about how you want to be taken care of, in your final days, or if you are incapacitated? You are going to get to know your best friend, even you can hire professional healthcare proxies. You're going to get to know that person and connect with them more deeply than you maybe ever have if you haven't gone through large open conversations. Some of this stuff is very nuanced. So back to starter questions, the dinners start with honoring an ancestor, which is very important, changes the nature of the table and how it feels once you bring an ancestor in.
Do you always honor your dad, or do you change that ancestor every time?
I don't change it every time. I mean, that would be a lot. I would have to have had a lot of people that had passed.
Right.
So I have a few.
I don't wish that for you.
Favorites who show up, but and it's amazing how quickly, even if you just did that one thing, like let's do a dinner where we just light a candle and everyone spends a minute honoring somebody who has passed, gives a 1-minute eulogy. That's probably a better dinner party than you've had in a long time. And the conversations
1,000%.
Yeah.
We have this thing called Shabbat every Friday, which is basically a dinner party.
Yeah.
And just doing that on Shabbat, lighting your candles and then taking a minute to eulogize one person that is an ancestor that inspires you. I mean, slam dunk.
Yeah, it changes everything. You're not speaking from the I anymore. There's something that happens to the ego where you're more in your heart space. They may be in the room if you believe that. Their energy might be, or just the presence of them in some way. It's powerful. But then we go into like a little bit more of a commonplace question, right? Something that you've seen before that feels comfortable. And this is also a question that you can ask when you're like just driving on Sunday with your parents and you don't think that they want to have these type of conversations. So you can try out some of these teaser questions. So we start with a prosaic question, a little more commonplace, and then we go into the deeper side of the pool. But those starter questions are, what's on your bucket list, right? That's the question about death and what you want to have happen before you die.
And it seems like all these questions about death are really about life.
They're all about life. They're all about life. That's all we know. That's all we know. But, what song do you want at your funeral, right? Like some people that's like, oh, I know exactly. And I've heard that question before and I want to answer it. Sometimes that's a really deep question that brings up a lot of emotion. If you were on, what would your last supper to be if you could have anything? These are the type of starter questions where they're very much not pretending to not be about death. They are, but they're also just not the scariest, questions. We get a little bit more intense as the dinner goes on. We ask people, to answer the question, if you just found out you had 30 days left to live, how do you feel? What are you going to spend the next 30 days doing? What is your last day like? Where are you? Your last hour, who's around you? How are you feeling at that moment? And that does a lot of things. That question is, I think therapists would call it a little bit of exposure therapy. You're going through a little bit of the emotional thought process of what it might mean to receive a terminal diagnosis or have a limit on the amount of life. You start thinking about what is most important to you, and then you get clear about what you want around your final hours, how you want to be taken care of, where you are. And, very few people will say, I want to be in the ICU surrounded by a team of nurses and doctors plugged into many things. And then I want them to perform CPR on me, even though I had a DNR. So this is all good and clarifying for people.
What I love is this is very doable. It's not expensive. It just takes some courage, right? It just takes a little bit of being what we say a nakshon, stepping into the Red Sea, putting your toe in first, right? Just being a little bit brave. We have a lot of questions, Michael, and I want to ask a few of them just to clarify and make sure our audience really understands. So is healthcare proxy, this is a technical question, and I don't know, is healthcare proxy the same as power of attorney for health? Or is that something else?
That is, it has different, back to the branding, they call it different things in different states. So, but if you type in healthcare proxy New York, if you hide healthcare proxy, et cetera, you're going to get the terminology. But yes, there is a power of, it is essentially a power of attorney for healthcare decisions. But don't just sign the paper. That's the thing. The Conversation Project has incredible vertical of information about finding the right healthcare proxy, conversations that you should have with the healthcare proxy, and some great short videos. So,
and do you need to do it in front of a witness? Because I recently had a situation where there was an untimely death, and the spouse, the mother, and the ex-spouse all had different messages about what was the desires of the young person. So do you need a witness? Do you need it, you know, signed in front of someone? Is that how it works?
Generally, yes. It's a little bit different state by state. But again, for healthcare proxy, the Conversation Project, conversationproject.org is where I would send people for exactly the information that you need.
Thank you for that. So we have this concept called ethical wills, where we ask people step by step to go through what they want to leave as their legacy and to reflect on the kind of life they live. Is that something that can be done in conjunction with death over dinner, or is that something that is a companion? How would you put ethical wills in this strategy?
Yeah, so death over dinner is a great starting place, and it's a great place to go back to. I wouldn't overly, what's the right word? I wouldn't add documents to your dinner, right? Don't, and this gets back to how to have the conversation with people that seemingly don't want to have the conversation, right? Because everybody on this webinar would be like, I know somebody in my life who won't have this conversation, doesn't want to have the conversation, et cetera. There's a couple things to note there. One, I wouldn't do a death dinner and say like, and we're going to go through ethical wills, and we're going to go through this, et cetera. Don't bring paperwork. Don't bring a whole process to it, right? Just have the conversation. We need to get better at just talking about death, right? And that's what death over dinner is doing. It's increasing the literacy. Don't make it a should conversation. Don't make it the conversation. We have to have the conversation. Like, I don't want to have that.
No one wants to have the conversation. And I hear that word, and all I can think of is the conversation my mother wanted to have about the period, the sex, right? Like, those are horrible, right?
Yeah.
We want to have the conversation. We want to have many conversations.
I have many conversations. Death over dinner is just one way in, right? Reading a book together is another way in. Watching a movie together that deals with the topic is another way in. Talking about somebody who's notable. You're an Aretha Franklin fan, or you're a Prince fan, or you're a, who died well, who didn't die well, what have you done different than your hero that died this way? This is like the courtship of the conversation. Instead of the directional conversation, I've done it, now you need to do it, and it's the right thing to do. It's just, no, let's start building a little bit of an ecosystem around this conversation.
Well, and I love that you said a movie, because every Disney movie starts with the death. I mean, literally. So it's like, you can just start with your favorite Disney movie and you've got a great text right there.
Well, yeah, of course, because Disney knows we want to talk about it.
Right. That's the thing to take away. We want to talk about. So you're working on many other projects because you're literally a multitasker beyond. But tell me about what else people want to talk about and what you're working on next.
Yeah, so we launched Generations Over Dinner about a year and a half ago. It's a project that I built with Chip Conley, who many people will know, and the Modern Elder Academy. And that's as simple as it sounds. How many generations can you get to the dinner table? And there's a whole different set of scripts. It's not about death. But the exciting part about that is it's in over 400 senior living residences around the country are using it every month and some every week.
Wow.
So if people are in that space, in the senior living space, or have a loved one and want to reach out about that who's in senior living, or somebody who works in senior living, let me know, because it's expanding. There's about 50,000 people a month in senior living having generations over dinner experiences.
And what is generations over dinner?
So similar to the model of death over dinner, but the topics are not as much about end of life. They're about, climate change. They're about play. They're about, health and well-being. They're about nutrition. They're about all of these things, family, love, etc. So there's different scripts that we've provided for generations over dinner. So the fact that it is working directly on the loneliness epidemic, both in senior living, but also with the different generations that are coming to have these dinners in senior living establishments, gives me some hope, right? Because kids these days are not getting the social interaction by far that, we need.
It's been documented that they're suffering,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that they'll grow up to be adults that are still suffering and still lonely. So one final question that keeps coming up that I didn't address is the medical system. The medical system is complicated. And how do you navigate your desires of wanting to give your loved one a dignified death, your desire to be on the other side a better griever, and yet you're blocked or have to overcome all these obstacles with the medical system? How do you put that in perspective, or do you?
Yeah, so this is a lot about literacy and agency, right? The more literate we are personally, the more comfortable we are personally with the topic, the more agency we're going to have personally. The more literate we are as a culture, the more empowered and aligned with our actual desires we will be, instead of just this mechanized corporate phenomena, right? And, I think we're coming pretty close to our time. So I'll leave people a little bit with this, and it's great if there's another question. The way that I think about death and grief, and the way I've been thinking about it most recently, is it's a little bit like spending a night in the forest, right? And the idea of spending a night in the forest is scary to most people, right? It's not what we do regularly. Some of us are campers and we sleep in tents, but most of us don't. And even if you are pretty experienced, imagine just going for a walk in a strange forest, right? It's a little bit triggering. You hear a branch snap, you hear a sound you don't know, you react and you get scared, right? The thing is, the more you know about that forest, the more you know about the animals that live there, the more experiences you have in there, the more you're available to the fact that it's beautiful, right? Like there's a lot of peace, and there's also a lot of scary things. Like, I'm not saying death's not scary or it's all cool, death is awful, but we can change our relationship to it in such a way where we're not as terrified, triggered, reactive, that we actually have agency, and we can actually know a little bit of that terrain. And if we know it, we can ask for what we want from our doctors and for our loved ones, and we can know the system. If we feel shut down, repressed, triggered, not able to in our voice around these things, we're not going to get what we want, right? And it's not that if you become the best citizen, you become totally literate, you are 100% going to get what you and your loved ones want at the end. No, but the chances for it being a meaningful passing, a meaningful last chapter, and not a deeply traumatic one, are so significantly higher.
I'm so touched by those words, because all I keep thinking about is that we're the people of the wilderness. We're the people of the forest. And so we have within us this deep courage to face whatever dark forest. And all we need is a little bit of Michael Hebb's wisdom and a little bit of courage and the tools of Hillside. With that, Michael, I just want to thank you so much. Again, I want to thank our sponsor, Hillside Memorial Parks, who's going to send us a little outro. But I want to also thank all of you for having the courage to stand in the darkness with us so that we can truly see the light. Stay well.
On behalf of myself, the entire Hillside Memorial Park and Mortuary staff, the Temple Israel of Hollywood community, including the Hillside Council of Directors, we are proud to collaborate with AJU to present today's program, with gratitude to Rabbi Sherre Hirsch and Michael Hebb for this presentation on the importance of end-of-life conversations. May you and each generation to follow share in the love of family and tradition.